We're going to introduce ourselves based on our slides and then open it up to questions for you all. So my name is Hannah, I use she, her pronouns. I am a PhD student in the Biostatistics department. This is my second year in the PhD, but my fourth year in the department. I did the master's here first in biostatistics. I'm from North Idaho, near Coeur d'Alene, if that means anything to anyone. And I went to a small liberal arts school in the Seattle area for undergrad. I studied financial math and economics and minored in statistics and Hispanic studies. And I'm very involved in the department. I do a little bit of everything, so if you want to talk about any of those things, I'm a great person to ask. Just to mention a couple of these things that I really like, I'm a member of StatCom. I'm co-president of StatCom, Statistics in the Community. I'm happy to talk more about that. I'm a little biased, but I think it's a really cool opportunity to get involved. It's a way for students to do, to offer their statistical services to nonprofits in the community, so it's an outreach volunteer organization. I'm involved in lots of other things. I'm currently a graduate student instructor in GSRA as well, so also can answer questions about those positions, and I'm thinking, I still have time to figure this out, but right now I'm leaning towards some kind of management role in industry, but there's still time for me to learn.
Oh, it's me. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Lillian. I am, as the slide says, a second-year PhD student here in the department. I came straight from undergrad, so when I say second year, I mean I'm in the second year of the master's, but admitted as a PhD student, so I'll stay on after. And I came direct from undergrad. I went to Columbia University in New York. I was a double major in statistics and French, which was fun and very different. I'm from Arbor, North Carolina, right by Chapel Hill, but I ended up here instead for biostat. And what I do in the department, so I'm going to start with the second bullet point first. So me, Elise, Jonathan, and Hannah are all part of the peer mentoring committee, which what that means is for all the incoming students, we pair them with the current student so that they have a student connection within the department where they can ask questions, very honest questions, and have a sense of a support system that isn't just faculty and somebody that you can talk to. We just had an event yesterday where the department provided money for everybody to go have lunch at Singerman's with their mentees, which was very fun and sweet. So we do that, try to just make sure all of the different years are connected so that you don't feel like you're just kind of treading water and don't have other connections with older students who can help you out. Research-wise, I work in the Mukherjee lab, so I primarily work with now departed former chair Ramar Mukherjee, who is now at Yale, but I'm still working with her and also a newer professor. Her name is Fan Vu. She's wonderful, and if you come here, you might take statistical inference with her. And in terms of what's next for me as a second-year student, there's a lot to figure out, including what I actually want my dissertation to be on. The research I do has kind of mainly been about fairness, but also infectious diseases. So I've been doing this project about social trust and how that might relate to COVID-19 transmission, but also now I'm starting to learn more about compartmental models, so kind of slightly more on the epid side, but still very, very math heavy. Jonathan.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I am a first-year PhD student, but this is my third year in the department because I completed the master's degree just last year. I came here from Seattle, Washington, and from Las Vegas before that. I did my undergrad at the University of Nevada, Reno, with majors in biology and secondary education. And then I also spent a couple of years after undergrad working as a middle school science teacher. So in the department, I'm currently a GSRA with Dr. Michele Peruzzi, and we're working on research involving scalable spatial modeling. I also do research with the ISR, that's the Institute for Social Research, where I'm working on analyzing the effects of extreme heat on ER and urgent care claims throughout Michigan. I've also worked as a GSI in the department, and then I'm also part of the peer mentoring committee, which Lillian did a great job talking about what we do. Thank you. As for what's coming next, I'm thinking about dissertation work, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And then beyond that, I'd like to pursue a career in academia.
Hello, I'm Elise. I am a PhD student here. I'm in my second year here, but like Lillian, I came straight from undergrad, so I'm finishing up the master's. I'm in an interesting spot where I was born in the US, but I actually lived abroad for most of my life, so I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. You would not have seen it on that map because we're a really, really tiny country, so we don't show up very clearly, but I'm from there. In terms of my journey here, I did my undergrad at Purdue University. I double majored in data science and applied statistics, and I had minors in math and Spanish. And my involvement in the department, I'm a GSRA with Dr. Kelly Kidwell, who you guys just met, mostly doing applied projects right now, but also learning about the SN Smart design, if you guys are interested in talking about that. I'm on the StatCom leadership team with Hannah. I'm learning about, or kind of shadowing in a role of the National Presence Chair, so we're really trying to connect with other universities and their StatComs and to collaborate across universities. So we just put on a webinar of sorts recently just to discuss what StatCom is and see if we could form those collaborations. And I'm also on the peer mentoring committee. In terms of what's next, figuring out my dissertation, before that taking the qualifying exam, and then after that I'm really interested in clinical trial design for chronic and rare diseases, so continuing in that vein, not sure where, whether industry or academia, but interested in that topic.
Maybe in the future we can get the map with Trinidad and Tobago like blown up.
Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Neo. I'm a first-year master's student in the Health Data Science program. I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I've lived in Ann Arbor for the past 13 years now, so I consider this my hometown at this point. My journey, I did my undergrad here too. I double majored in statistics and psychology. I also participated in Michigan's Big Data Summer Institute program, which I know that there's some people here from that, which I absolutely love. And I highly recommend if it's still possible.
Yes, it will be.
Okay, there you go. So my department involvement, like I said, I'm new here, but I'm a GSRA with Professor Gainanova, working with continuous glucose monitor data, which is a wearable device for diabetics, specifically type 1 diabetics like myself. And for the future, this is still very much up in the air, but right now I'm looking towards working in the industry. Ideally, specifically working with type 1 diabetes, like research and different kinds of treatments and whatnot. But yeah, so that's us.
Yeah. Okay. So if you all have any questions, now's the time to ask.
So what inspired you guys to choose biostatistics instead of like another kind?
Yeah, so I used to be a pre-med student, and then I realized I didn't like the more, I guess, biology, chemistry type stuff, and I like working with numbers a lot more, but this is still kind of in the same vein. And the nice thing about this field is that you can have a very widespread impact, even still related to that kind of field. So that's for me. But
So I'm becoming my father, who is also a biostatistician. So I always knew that this was a possibility and a discipline, but for me, I started kind of in undergrad knowing I wanted to do more public health research, and I was doing this major in statistics, but I wasn't sure if I really wanted to commit to that part. But through doing public health research on a more qualitative side, I started to realize I really liked the problems and liked feeling like, oh yes, this is something impactful and interesting and meaningful to me. But I didn't want to come at it from that angle. I was liking the math, and I figured if there was a way to bridge that, which I knew there was because I saw my dad do that every day, that would be a good possibility. And so that's kind of, biostats was kind of always an idea for me, and it ended up working out really well.
So I initially knew I really liked math and didn't really know what I wanted to do with that. I had so many people tell me, oh, if you like math, be an engineer. Like, well, I don't really like that kind of science. So that doesn't really work for me. So I started off in undergrad doing things to prepare myself for actuarial sciences. And I did a couple internships and I realized ultimately I really liked all of the problem solving and the quantitative piece of those things, but it felt very isolating in that I wasn't really collaborating with my colleagues, I wasn't really working clearly for people in the way that I really craved. I'm an extrovert and motivated by people, I like people, so I wanted to find a way where math and people overlapped. And I went back to college and this is my sophomore and junior year, and I talked to my advisors and they said, you know, I think something in public health might be a good fit for you. So at that point I started talking to a bunch of different people in biostatistics, epidemiology, statistics. I landed on biostats as a really good union of those two ideas where I'm still doing really interesting quantitative problems, but it's very clearly a place where I'm working with and for people in a really tangential way. That's also something I like that you can see impact, and it's something I can talk to my parents about and be like, look at this cool thing I'm working on, and like, I actually can understand why that matters. So that's also pretty cool for me.
I think for me, I'm probably going to echo a lot of sentiments shared, but when I started in undergrad, what I was really interested was math, but not just pure math or theoretical math, something with an application. So I started in data science, and I very, very quickly learned that computer science was not what I enjoyed doing, and that I was really craving that application of things, and I didn't just want to, program Dijkstra's algorithm for the 50th time and very inefficiently. So I really wanted to learn new things from data and use my problem solving to discover something new. And I felt like statistics was a great way to do that. So I started a research position at a lab that did social sciences. I was pretty much doing data cleaning, but I had the opportunity to join in on meetings where the biostatistician and the subject matter experts were there, and I started getting really interested in what the biostatistician was doing because I felt like it was so interesting to see him translate their questions that were like, okay, well, what happens to these people? Like, how can we use this data we collected to understand their journeys and how this is affecting them? And see him kind of almost magically transform that into a model and some numbers that can tell us exactly what we want to know. So having that experience really led me here.
Very similar. I wanted to do, biology stuff, but more quantitatively. And I think the big thing that really motivated me was I've always been interested in climate change and learning about how that impacts public health. And so the thing that I really like about biostatistics is the wide range of impacts that it can have in many different areas, whether it's like one-on-one medicine and treatment or clinical trials or public health. I think if you have interest in any of those areas, there's a place in biostatistics where you can have an impact. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah.
For, I guess, more specifically you, as someone who didn't come into this program with like a degree in statistics, how did you find like the transition from a not super math concentrated but more like bio concentrated undergrad to a very heavily math focused grad program? Specifically, did you feel like there was a lot of catching up or difficulty, or was it?
I'll say for sure there is some catching up to do, right? But there are a lot of resources offered by the department, especially in that first year, to really help bridge those gaps. So one is there's a class called Biostat 600 that's specifically designed for people coming into the program from less quantitative backgrounds, right? And so that should give you a lot of the tools that you need in order to do well in your core classes. Another resource that's offered are the study groups, as well as GSI and professor office hours. Those are all ways in which you can get additional help for those core classes. And then I think the other thing is just building connections with your classmates. you're all coming from different backgrounds and you're all going to have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. And so it's super valuable when you're able to, go to your peers for help on some things, and then they can come to you for help on others. So I definitely had people who I relied on for the more quantitative aspects of courses.
Yeah, so I did have a stats undergrad background, but that came a bit later for me in undergrad, so it was all kind of squished together. But I know that there are a lot of, maybe not a lot, but I've definitely met a handful of people that are in my courses right now in my first semester that came from like a bio background and not strictly math or statistics. And I can tell it's definitely gonna be a lot more work at first, but I think as long as you have the required prereqs, you will do just fine. It might be a bit more of a steep learning curve at the beginning, but I think off your first semester, you'll be right in the middle of the pack, so I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, I wanted to reiterate like that last aspect that, just because you start out, at a different place doesn't mean that that's where you're going to be forever. Like by the end of the first semester, second semester, then it really didn't feel like there was much difference between where I was at versus my peers.
I think just one other thing I note about that is, especially like talking with my peer mentees right now who are first years, it is a very theoretical department, and I think that's one of the great strengths of this department, but it is something I think you should be aware of, especially for those first courses where you're establishing basic things like what's an expectation, what's linear regression. You might not at first see how this is actually going to serve you later to talk about the problems you're actually interested in. I promise it does matter. It is useful. But I think that's something to be aware of this is a theoretical department. Again, I think that's something really powerful and will really boost your confidence later on to really understand what's going on. But I think, especially, obviously I didn't come from a non-math background, but even for me, I was like, oh wow, like this at first is feeling less tangible, and I can promise you that it feels really tangible now. But I think to keep that in mind, to know that there will be some catching up to do, but I believe you can do it. Jonathan did it.
Yeah, I turned out okay.
But yeah, don't be afraid, but I think it's an important thing to keep in mind.
Just use your resources.
Yeah.
I have a question from you two. It is, why did you choose Michigan? Or what made you choose Michigan over other programs?
I have the mic, so I guess I'll go first. So as I mentioned, I grew up in Arbor, which is right next to Chapel Hill, for those you know, and I'm sure if you're considering biostatistics programs, you also know that the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has a really wonderful biostatistics program. It's where my dad went. It was my hometown, so obviously at first that was my first choice. I was like, I would love to just go to Carolina. And here I am. So I ended up at the end I was choosing between UNC and Michigan. And I really wasn't sure how I would make that choice. But it was a choice I wanted to make, and Michigan was like, please come to Admit Students Day. So I went to Admit Students Day. And it was just, even before that in the application process, I think something that really impressed me and surprised me about Michigan is how willing people were to talk to me. I got to speak with professors like Kelly just as a prospective student, right? There was no guarantee I would even come here or even apply here, and people made time to speak with me. And then when I actually got here for Admitted Students Day, that was the same, and I heard all of these students. I think Hannah was there. So people like Hannah who spoke with me that day and didn't have caveats. Not to say that this is, I don't mean to discredit, this is a really wonderful department. It's not a perfect department, but people talked about this like they really were happy to be here. And when I went to Carolina the next week, obviously I was like, the quality of life outside the department is great. I love Chapel Hill. I love my home state. But in the department, I think the students particularly talked about it with caveats. And that is, just a reality. Again, a department is perfect, but I felt like both the students had talked to me like they were so much supported, and I witnessed that not even as a current student. And I think for a master's and for a PhD, it's hard, it's not easy, and you want an environment where the people there are really invested in your success. And I realized, I didn't know about Ann Arbor. It was a total unknown to me. I had never been to the Midwest before coming here for Mid Students Day. But I knew that this department would take care of me, not just as a intellectual, but also as a person. And I think that has definitely been true, that people here care about you. We're all on a first name basis, which I also think is very important. And just kind of indicative of the environment here. And so for me, that was a very long answer, but for me really it was the social support that made me choose Michigan over Carolina.
What made me choose Michigan was that when I came into the program, I really didn't know much about biostatistics. I didn't know about what I would want to work on. And so I felt more confident coming to a department with a really large faculty, large student body, because then I felt confident that they would be able to accommodate whatever I'm interested in, whatever it might be. And I could get exposure to a lot of different topics and really figure out what I'm interested in. And then the other thing that factored in was just that it was more, it just made more financial sense. It was cheaper than what I was looking at other universities. And so that's an important factor to consider when you're deciding on a university.
I was kind of the opposite of Jonathan. So I had a very specific thing I wanted to do. And I was lucky that Kelly works on rare diseases and was really focused on that. And I was super excited. So I emailed her and I was like, I'm so interested. Will you be taking students? And she was so nice. She took the time to send me a really nice reply and shared contact information of her students. And this was, again, all before I was even admitted. So like Lillian said, I think I felt supported from the very beginning. So that was one thing. And I think another thing is that the atmosphere here is very collaborative, I've found. And I feel like students look out for each other, and I feel supported not just by the amount of resources that we have and the faculty who are willing to support us, but just that this is a great environment in which to learn and to talk with your fellow students about what they're working on and get their help with various assignments and make that learning process more enjoyable and more collaborative.
So part of my reason, like Jonathan said, was financial, certainly. I was really lucky in that I was offered a fully funded position, which no other university did for me, so that right away made me feel supported financially. But then otherwise, I also did feel really supported just in the people I was talking to. Everyone just seemed to care about what, they wanted to answer my questions, they wanted to know who I was as a person. It was a really, really neat experience. And even also in the admissions process, so I, in my personal statement, I put that I wanted to work with Dr. Clay Goodwell, which I do now, and it's been really great. But she actually called me on the phone and said, hi, we would like to offer you a position. And that was so unbelievably personal and really blew me away that not only did I get a phone call, but it was from the person that I actually put in my essay. So there's just a lot of above and beyond pieces that the university did that really set them apart for me. And being that I went to a small liberal arts school, I also wanted to make sure I went to a grad school where I did feel that community and that support, because I really did get that in undergrad. And I was really surprised by the way that Michigan Biostats pulled that together, because Michigan is a really big institution. But the really great thing is we have the best of both worlds in a lot of ways, because we have the access and resources that the big university offers. We have lots of funding and the grant opportunities you've seen. There are a variety of research opportunities for the broad interests that faculty have, for example. But then also because we have that tight-knit department, you also get that support network as well. So I think it's really a good hand-in-hand opportunity to get both of those things.
Yeah, for me, I love Michigan in general. I knew that before I did my grad here, but I think one of the big things for me was in the admitted students day, there was a couple-hour period where you just go around to, there's a ton of different faculty members that are sitting there, and you can go one by one and just have a conversation with them and get feedback, hear their perspectives, and that definitely makes it feel a lot more personal and a lot more like they care, because yeah, for a large university, frequently In undergrad, you might have experienced this, but you're in a multi-100-person course, and you don't really get that kind of a connection. Whereas here, I mean, you can tell that the faculty really do care, and I think we've all said something like that, so you know it's true. I'm not making that up. But yeah, I mean, I love Michigan, so Michigan loves Michigan. For a good reason. So you're gonna.
Whoever.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Do you guys feel like there was something that was unique about your application when you applied that helped you specifically, and if so?
I think the big one for me was the BDSI program. I know that they take that into account pretty heavily because it's firsthand experience in the department, even before you're a student here, and then you get to meet the faculty, and then unless you completely mess up or something during there, which I don't know, I don't think that's ever happened before. Like, you're gonna get to know the faculty better, they're gonna get to know you better, and if you're in the program already, it's like a first screening. So for me, that I think helped a ton.
Can you explain a little bit what BDSI is?
Yes, so it's a 6-week program, right? She leads it, that's why I think I heard.
Yeah,
But
I'm like,
it's-
why don't you explain
Yeah,
it?
no. Yeah, do you want to explain it?
Sure. Yeah, it's a 6-week long research program where undergrads of various years come and do a research project with faculty at Michigan. Some are in biostats, some are in stats. I think we've had computer science before, but I think right now it's just stats and biostats. And this research project that you do for 6 weeks, you at the end present it at a symposium. So it's a really great way for you to show that it gives you a little piece of the research experience. So I would say any kind of research experience you might have is a good thing to talk about in your personal statements, your statement of purpose, because grad school isn't, it's a little different than undergrad in that you're problem solving in different ways. So like any kind of thing you can spin like that, I think would be really helpful.
I would say, so this I'll say one thing about me and then one thing that's more general. When I first met my advisor last year, Bramar, she said the reason she chose me was because I was a French major. I would not say go be a French major. I'm not really going to help you here. But even with that, I think part of what that had contributed to me is I was obviously doing 2 really different things, and I had to decide, okay, well, what do I actually want to do for grad school? And so when I was rereading my statement of purpose earlier to help one of my friends in the master's program write his statement of purpose, and I was remembering, I think, something that was helpful, at least for me, and I assume was helpful for the admissions committee, was that I feel like what I presented was I really knew why I wanted to be in biostatistics, and I knew what that would be like. And again, that's obviously me being helped by the fact that I grew up with a model and seeing exactly what that kind of role looks like. But to understand, like, you are a specialist, you will be part of a team, you might not be leading it, and you're the one who knows this one thing, and people depend on you for that. And so I wrote, like, I know that that's kind of how I like to work. I don't need to be doing everything, but I want to just kind of be the expert who says something and helps, but doesn't necessarily take the lead as a PI. Similarly, I think being clear-eyed about what I was getting into with a PhD, or a master's degree, I applied for a PhD, but like what that would entail and kind of the work and like why I was doing that. I think expressing those reasons of like, I know what I'm getting into and why I think it's good for me. I think at the very least that was helpful for me in understanding for the grad school application process what I was doing. So especially if you're not a senior right now, I would recommend talking to people, even if you're not considering applying to a program, but just see like, actually what is grad school like? And I think this is definitely more of a piece for undergrads, but like, I had no idea, I really didn't know what grad school was like until I started talking to people. And I think that really was eye-opening for me and helped me clarify what I wanted to do. And I think, expressing that kind of confidence and surety, I think would also be important. Of you're not just doing this because you think you should, but like, I know exactly what I'm here for.
And one thing I would say broadly for your statement of purpose, make sure you answer the question, why this degree, why this school? I think those are 2 really important things to say. Because when you're writing your statement of purpose, a lot of things can get recycled, like, yes, I want to do biostats for this reason. Like, you can say that to any school, but saying why this school in particular is really important, especially if there's a particular faculty or a certain research area you're really interested in, that will show you've done your research and show why you actually care about that school in particular. I think that would be really helpful. I also would say, specifically from the master's to the PhD, since I had to apply again for that, showing involvement in the department was really helpful for me. So coming from undergrad, that's not exactly translational because you can't say like, oh, I've invested my time already in Michigan biostats. But showing you're a well-rounded individual, I think is also really valued by this department. So making sure you not only have the quantitative stuff in there, but show like I do other things and I'm passionate about other things and I will continue to contribute in that kind of community way to the department, I think is also really valuable.
Speaking of being, presenting yourself as a well-rounded person, I think if you have life experiences that are unique to you that, maybe most other applicants might not have, then that might be good to talk about, what kind of experiences do you bring to the table? Because that's gonna give you a background knowledge that maybe other people don't have.
I think everyone has covered the SOP really well, so I'm not going to harp on that anymore, but I would also be careful about who you ask for your letters of recommendation. Those, from what I understand, also play a big role, and I think, and our committee will shed more light on this and be more accurate about it. People who can speak to your research ability are probably very helpful, maybe more so than professors who've only taught you in a class setting. Because as Lillian and others were alluding to, like this is very different from undergrad in that you are trying to do independent research, and so you probably want somebody who can speak to the fact that you're like a curious and independent learner. So just bear that in mind as well.
I have a question mostly for Neil. What made you decide, or how did you decide between biostatistics versus health data science?
I was waiting for this question. Yeah, so I like more of the computational aspect of it than the theoretical part. And if you do health data science, you're going to do both. But it is definitely more emphasis on like computation and coding and that kind of thing. And when I was looking for programs, I was mostly looking more towards the data science. But this was kind of like the perfect intersection. And it used to be a track in the biostats program, which is probably what I would have done if it wasn't its own thing. But now that it is, that's pretty cool. So I think that's the main thing. I've always liked the hands-on coding part more than derivations. Yeah, so that's the overarching thing. Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit more what research you guys are doing and how you decided on those topics?
Yeah, so I mentioned it briefly earlier, but mine's with continuous glucose monitor data, which is pretty unique because how it works is every 5 minutes your device gives you a reading. And so when you've got a couple hundred people with a couple months worth of data, it's like millions and millions of data points, which is very interesting to work with, very hard to debug. But yeah, I'm pretty early on, but I do have a couple projects that I'm working on. One's looking at missing data and looking at how we can address that. And another one is coming up with a standardized validation set, like data set for CGM analysis softwares to kind of compare, because a lot of times people are kind of black box models-ish, and different people have different ways of analyzing the data, and this way it'll be like a standardized one that all different kinds of people can compare to and see how people handle missing data and that kind of thing.
So I did 2 different research partnerships, I suppose. In a master's program, I did something similar to what Neo's doing. I did some mobile health research with Dr. Walter Dempsey. And that was, we did hybrid design. So I was thinking about SMARTs, which are sequential multiple assignment randomized trials, and MRTs, which are micro randomized trials, and how you put them together, how basically how the math changes. So thinking about combining different study designs. And doing that, I realized the mobile health stuff was not my favorite for the reasons that suggested. Like there's a lot of code and data, a lot of data cleaning and crunching, and there's just millions of data points. And I was like, yeah, that's not for me. I'm not a big data person. And it really reinforced for me that I really like clinical trials design. So that's where I shifted to working with Dr. Kelly Kidwell, and I still work on SMARTS. So right now I'm working on a zero inflated issue within a SMART study design where we have a lot of zeros in our outcome. And we're looking at with the data set, it's thinking about alcohol consumption and aggression, and we're thinking about ways of addressing the zero inflated models where I'm not going to get super into the details, but when you have count data, usually you can address over dispersion by going from Poisson to negative binomial, but we're thinking that actually that's not going to solve the problem, we need to come up with a new method. So basically I'm working on the methods of applied, adaptive clinical trials.
So for me, the interest in clinical trials came from that research opportunity I had in undergrad. I just thought it was like a fascinating field to work in. And also from personal experience, I was really interested in rare diseases. So that was kind of like a personal investment piece for me. So I work with Dr. Kelly Kidwell, like Hannah does, but I work on Essence March, which is the small sample version of the sequential multiple assignment randomized trial. I'm funded by an FDA contract, but because I'm still in the master's program, I'm still doing kind of like more applied stuff, a lot of lit review. I helped analyze a trial that focused on cannabis oil use in breast cancer patients, so I helped with that. And I also sometimes just come to Kelly with ideas that I have, and I think maybe one recent one might be coming to fruition. So thank you to Kelly for like listening to my random thoughts and making them coherent. So that's something really cool too. Like sometimes you can come to faculty with your ideas, and I think the one time I tried it, I was supported. So I like to believe that that will happen in most cases.
Yeah, I think particularly for like Elise, Neo, and I, since we're new to the program, as Mashumi, who's in the back and who teaches 650, will say to us, when you start this program, you don't know anything. So it can kind of be difficult to do research, and that was certainly a big question I had of like, all right, I'm funded on a GSRA. Well, I don't know how to do anything. What will I be doing? And kind of how that manifests depends really on your advisor and what their lab is doing, but they know that you don't know anything. And so sometimes they manifest like with Elise doing sort of lit reviews and starting to kind of get familiar with that knowledge for doing data cleaning. What Ramar had me do was she had this idea she wanted to explore about fairness in clinical risk prediction. So basically how we evaluate whether risk prediction models to say like, you know, the like chance you'll have a cardiovascular event in 5 years or whatever, how accurate that is and how that might change based on whether or not you're part of a certain marginalized group. They call it sensitive features. So how these models might work really well for white people, but not so much for people of color, and kind of how we can address and kind of assess those kind of model fairness, like if these models are working equitably. There are metrics that exist. And Bramar's thought was, well, maybe, are they being used? And so I kind of did similarly a kind of review. So it was much more qualitative. I like read papers and kind of did an like, you know, not my thoughts, but kind of my thoughts about, hey, like these metrics exist, but they're not being used. So it wasn't like you're not thrown into methods, you know. Usually it's something that will help you kind of build your confidence and get you familiar with a certain topic, but it's not like you're already writing theorems or anything. So I think that was kind of my first project, and slowly it's been very interesting watching her like build up my skills, and so that would be something that will kind of happen throughout the year. So that's just kind of the first year, since I know y'all would start kind of at that point. That's kind of what research looks like at the baby stages.
So I actually had an experience that's quite different from that because No, I mean it's more unique, but because I started out by doing research in another department outside of biostatistics, I was, because of the department that I was working in, I was one of the more statistically knowledgeable people in that research group. And so my job there was, they had a bunch of data, they had a question that they wanted to answer, and so my job was to work with that data and analyze it, create statistical models in order to answer those questions. And then it ended up, developing into, identifying new problems and figuring out solutions on how to deal with that. And so it was really unique for me in that I was really able to drive the direction of that project and make decisions about what I thought was the best way to approach this data. And then now I'm working as a GSRA for someone in the department, and there, I'm getting a lot more direct instruction as opposed to, having to learn stuff on myself. And so those are, two different directions, two different aspects that I've experienced. I will say that in the beginning, if you're not able to find research opportunities in biostats, university is huge. There are plenty of opportunities and people who would appreciate your statistical knowledge.
You guys have talked a couple times about how grad school is different than undergrad, and obviously we just talked about research, and I feel like that's one of the biggest differences between grad school and undergrad, but also in a master's program it's typically very coursework heavy, as are the first couple of years of a PhD program, and so I'm wondering what kind of stood out to you guys as some of the glaring differences between grad school and undergrad in those first couple of years, if it was just the rigor of the coursework or other things popped out. Yeah, do you know what I'm going to say? Is that why you're laughing?
Go for it.
So what struck me really immediately in the first couple of weeks of grad school is, so one of the core courses that you start with is 6:50. It is at 8 a.m. So I would wake up at 6:30. I would pack my little lunch in my lunchbox, and then I would take the bus to school, and I would be in class from 8 till sometime in the afternoon with the same people. And I was like, oh my God, this is like high school. I think, and I say that because I think what has struck me about the kind of coursework and the school aspect of it is, in undergrad, you're all kind of doing your own thing. You're in different majors. You're usually all across campus, whereas here, everything is very localized. You spend all of your time in these two buildings with the same people, and especially if you're in a PhD program, you come in and you're like, I met Elise, and I was like, oh my God, we're gonna be here together for the next 5 years. Good thing we like each other. So I think that was really different for me, of the routine feels different, and not different in I've never done this before. Again, I was like, why is this like high school? But I think in some ways that's really nice and comforting to have the same people going through it with you. I felt like the coursework, my undergrad statistics was crazy and very hard, and so this it didn't feel like a huge jump to me, and in a lot of ways I think it is. Y'all know what school is like. You go to classes, you have the homework, and you do that together, and I think those kind of rhythms were similar, but definitely the focus and the kind of closeness was definitely very different in those first few years. I'm sure I have other thoughts, but I'll pass it to somebody else for now.
Yeah, so I'm going through the 8 a.m. thing right now. I think Tuesdays, my first class starts at 8 and the last one ends at 5, but there's some breaks in between. But the number of hours that you're in class is pretty much the same as undergrad, but you're going to need to do more outside of your actual courses if you really want to understand it. And especially if you're a GSRA or a GSI or something like that, it's up to 20 hours a week on top of all of that. So you're definitely very, very busy. I'm still trying to adjust, but it's definitely manageable. I don't think it's something that you should be too scared about. And you went to Michigan, right? So I think you'll be fine. I think Michigan will set you up perfectly fine. But yeah, it's going to be more time that you're going to need to put into it, I think, is the main thing.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is that you might be looking at the coursework and being like, oh, I already took probability, I already took regression. Not this way. It's just so in undergrad, you're kind of doing this much. In grad school, you're moving at the same pace, but you're doing this much. So that's where the outside of class things come in, because you're just getting so much more depth in the content. And maybe you're just going to need more time spent outside of the class and looking at those things and working through them, because in class you're getting a broad overview of the depth, if that makes any sense. Like, it's not gonna be walked through for you, you have to do a lot more stuff on your own. And that's where the study groups are helpful, that's where going to office hours is really helpful, working with your classmates on the homework is really helpful. Because again, you're all going through it together. The cohort model is very helpful in this, that you're all going through it together. You can lean on one another, but ultimately it just comes down to the fact that you're getting so much more depth with the content you might have seen before once or twice.
What do you think? Since
I hardly remember undergrad.
well, that's why I'm interested. Like coming out after being a few years out of undergrad, what it felt like to go back to grad school.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's a good point, Lily. All right, so coming from working and being back as a student, it was actually really refreshing. I felt really excited to be a student again, and things felt, I felt, there was a lot of support where I could make mistakes. I could, I could make a lot of mistakes, and that's all supported here because it's all part of the learning process. And so that was really fun and exciting for me. I think that's it.
Okay. I tried.
I'm going to ask one final question, and then we'll have a quick minute for a break between our next session while you hear from our faculty. But it wasn't that long ago that you were sitting in these prospective student shoes. What is one piece of advice or one thing you wish you knew when you were back exploring grad schools and going through the application process?
If you were even considering the PhD, take real analysis in undergrad.
Yes.
That was my number one piece of advice. Because
Don't look at me.
sorry, because it's not required for the master's, but it is for the PhD. And if you come to the PhD and haven't taken it, you'll have to take it here. And one other difference between undergrad and grad is like grading schemes. Undergrad here is graded without curves in the math department. So it's going to tank your grades in a way, and it really doesn't matter in grad school necessarily, but like it's a little demoralizing. Like all of my friends I've seen go through that year are just like, wow, I feel really dumb being passed by all these undergrads in this class. But I think it's a good idea also from a background perspective because you're going to come into 601 and 602 and you're going to need to be doing proofs and things like that. And if you've not really seen that before, it's a really jarring experience. One of my good friends in undergrad in the master's program, the first 601 assignment, he tried to do a proof using a Venn diagram. I said, no, you can't do it that way. But because I had done real analysis before, I knew what they were expecting. I knew what a proof by induction was, and I knew all of those things. So I think from a background perspective, even it's really helpful to have that coming in so you know what to expect in that kind of format.
I will echo the real analysis thing. I know it's not a fun thing to do. Yeah, I suffered for a year through real analysis in undergrad, wondering why I was doing it the whole time. It was worth it. It was very much worth it, especially if you're doing a PhD, which I think just speaks to the fact that, again, this is a very math-heavy program, and you're going to want to be, you don't have to come from a math background, but you need to be ready to know, that's going to be only to your advantage. I think other than that, I would say, at any program you're thinking of, talk to professors, obviously, but also talk to the students and see if you can get to talk to the students, one-on-one and really hear what that's like and try to read between the lines of what they're saying. I think, we're not lying to you. Students are not going to lie to you. But I think that is going to be a really important perspective because they're the ones actually within it. And I think they, speaking to students, also faculty, but particularly students, gave me insight into things I wasn't thinking about, like stipends. And kind of the money aspect. So I think that's something really important for any grad schools, really try to get a sense of what it will be like because there will be things you can't expect.
Yeah, I think I want to reiterate, talking to students at whatever schools you're considering, and not only asking about the positive things about the department, but what are things that they view as weaknesses of the department. Because every department's going to have them, and you're going to get the most candid responses from students. The other thing I wanted to mention was, in case you didn't take real analysis, or there's some other class, there's some area of knowledge that where you're starting out a bit behind. Again, you want to meet as many people in your cohort wherever you end up as you can. Introduce yourselves from day one, exchange phone numbers, talk to people, work together, so that you can all help each other fill in those gaps. And whatever program you're going to be in, you're going to be with that same cohort for a couple years, and so it's really good to make close friendships and build those connections early on. Yeah.
I have a very kind of silly answer, but I wish I had learned how to cook before. Yeah, no, I was on a meal plan all 4 years of undergrad, and like starting school is overwhelming, and it's much more overwhelming if you're like burning all your food and or burning yourself in the process. So learn how to adult when you come to grad school.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with all of those things. But one thing, I think more for the application process, I would make sure that you reach out to the people that you're gonna get letters of rec from, like ASAP, even if it's just a heads up or something that you're planning on applying to things, because they are gonna like you a lot more if you give them a heads up, and they will probably write you a better letter of rec if you give them a heads up. I think that's a big one, but also with housing, I would be careful because things fill up very quickly and housing is very expensive here. So at least keep that in mind and start looking for that in the future.
Thank you, students. If you have any other questions for them, feel free to find them during lunch. They'll be happy to continue conversations with you there. We'll take about 5 minutes now, so we'll regroup right here at 11 o'clock where you'll hear from our faculty. So if you want to grab another bite to eat, coffee, water, use the restroom, feel free to do so.